How many ways can you write Hello World? Hi, I'm Justin. This is C5 Dev, where inspiration is a chain reaction. In this video, I'm going to show you how I expanded docker-polyglot-world to return Hello World in different human languages. I'm going to show you how I started with a list of languages and then expanded that into a JSON file that the different implementations of docker-polyglot-world can use. And then also how I modified the tests at the end in order to capture the different ways that it can be written. So the first thing I want to do is show you how I set that up and how the application behaves now. So I'm going to grab the Docker Compose build up and run that in my terminal. At my terminal, I'm going to run Docker Compose. With that running, I'm going to head over to the browser and show you the new output. So the first port I'm testing here is 8081, and you can see here I've added that which implementation it is coming from. So it's coming from our Python implementation, still have the host name, and you can see here I have now the language and the greeting of how that spells out Hello World. If I run that just a few times, you can see that it's switching through and showing different languages. Also show that if I switch this to port 82, now it's coming from the Node.js implementation, but if I run that a few times, you'll see that it returns different languages as well. It's actually returning those at random. First thing I did was start with a list of Hello World in multiple languages. I found that on a blog post, and I have that linked in the Inspired By section in the README of docker-polyglot-world, if you want to check that out. And then I actually used ChatGPT in order to construct the JSON file. So I'm going to walk you through those steps and show you how I did that. All right, add ChatGPT. So here is the original list that I had. It had 74 languages. And I passed that as an array into ChatGPT and asked it to return that as JSON structured. On the first response, it returned without quotes around the JSON keys. And also, if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that it stops because the response size isn't large enough to capture the full list. Then I asked it to give me a list of that range with double quotes. So it gave me the double quotes, but if I scroll down, you can see it didn't actually make it to the final language. So those quotes that I added there actually consumed more of the response, so it didn't make it as far. But the nice part is then I just asked it to continue from that all the way to the end, and it was able to give me more languages. So then here, Norwegian was stopped, and so I just asked to continue from there. With that list of JSON structures, I went into and created a hello world.json file inside of docker-polyglot-world, so it's at the root, and I just captured all those. I also added the JSON formatting using the formatter in VS Code. After creating the hello world.json file, I then needed to modify the implementations of Hello World in docker-polyglot-world to use that file. So I started with Python in the normal list and went through, and I also used ChatGPT to get the initial pass of how to open that file and then implement it within the application. I'm actually going to show you how I did that on the Dino implementation inside of ChatGPT, and then I'll show you the code itself of what it ended up being. Back at ChatGPT, I wanted to give it an example of the structure that I'm going to be using in the file. So I just copied the first two and then finished the array at the end. And I said I need to modify this application, which is just a portion of my application, but it's the one that's going to actually return the values. So you can see I was using the original Hello World, and I wanted ChatGPT to make that modification for me. As I scroll down, you can see the response. You can see that it imported the read.json package and that it implemented it right here to open up Hello World. The path is not correct because it didn't know that I had Hello World at a directory above, so that's one of the modifications that I made, and this is just kind of getting me started. So I then copied this code and I brought it over to VS Code. In VS Code, I'm in my Dino dev container. If you're not sure what a dev container is, I recommend that you check out my docker-polyglot-world dev containers video. After copying that code in, I adjusted the path here because Hello World is actually one directory above because I'll run it at the Dino level. Other than that, the Dino implementation was actually pretty straightforward. I did make modifications down in the body of it because I needed to call out the keys differently than ChatGPT had, and also I wanted to add this implementation. So other than that, it did a really nice job. One of the other things that I changed is I added a specific version up here instead of just having it grab the latest. For the next part, then I used ChatGPT to help me get the first changes to the unit test that I wrote. So what I actually did is I said, here's the application. And so I provided it the one that I showed you in VS Code, and then said, here is my test. Please update it to effectively test this application code. ChatGPT started to respond. I wanted the code formatting. I had to ask it twice, but finally got it there. And then it returned the initial test. I then copied that code and went back to VS Code. In VS Code, went to my test and pasted that in there. In here, I don't think I needed to make too many modifications. One was the path, and also I think the file version again. I did need to also add in the assert, as it didn't have that import in there, and then that was called here. But otherwise, it worked pretty well. With those changes in place, I then wanted to run the application through the dev container, as well as then run the test. So in the dino.docker file, I'm going to run this, as these are the commands that need to be used. A new parameter that needed to be added, because we're now reading from a file, is this --allow read, and we'll run that. And I also need to change it because I'm running at the Dino level, so I need to go into the source directory and run it. So it's up and running. I'm not going to show that right now because the other application is still running. I'm also going to run Dino test with those different parameters on there. And there we go, it 3 passed. Let's just take a quick look at that test again to make sure that it's doing the things we want. So in here, it says it's checking that. Let's modify the implementation just to show that if we change that the test will fail. So I'm going to change the greeting here to back to hello world, and then run that test. And you can see here, it says the response body does not match any greetings in the file. So very helpful, and that way we know it's working. The last part is the Dino Docker file I needed to update, because now I'm pulling in a file that is above where the source files are, as well as the Docker file. So I'm actually going to be running the Docker build at the root level. And so I needed to change the path to say that the source is actually in the Dino directory, and then hello world is at that root directory. So I showed you with Dino as the implementation of how I went through that process, used ChatGPT to show it the first kind of 2 samples from the hello world.json file, and then ask it to make the modification, ask it to help me update the test, the unit tests. The language that was probably the toughest was, again, Crystal, but Rust was also one that was getting a little bit more challenging, because I think of the amount of flexibility that you have in Rust and the different ways to implement it. And there's just a lot more code that's required to build out that implementation. For the next part, I want to show how I updated the Postman and the Newman collection in order to then test now using this file. This got a little bit interesting because I needed to actually host the file on its own type of server, because Postman doesn't have direct access to the file. So let me show you how I made that change. I'll start with Docker Compose, and then I'll show you what I did there. All right, so back at the repository, go into Docker Compose to open that up. And here I also wanted to call out, so I changed the context that I'm actually running from root, and then the Docker file is within that directory. So I changed that for all the implementations. And then this one implementation I added at the top here. So this is helping out with Postman giving access to that hello world JSON file. I'm actually using the Nginx Alpine Docker image. From there, it was pretty simple. I needed to update the Nginx config that is within that file, as well as then for a Docker volume, pass in the hello world JSON file. So I copied this Nginx config file from the running container, and then added it here. The part that I modified was I wanted the default type to be application/JSON as it was originally octet, I believe. All right, now let's take a look at Postman, and we can actually see that this hello world JSON file is hosted at our 8080 port. Within Postman, I just added a new tab for localhost 8080. I'm going to run that. And you can see here, it's actually saying welcome to Nginx, so that is the default page. But if I add in hello world and run that again, there we go. Now it has my JSON file. So what I then did was went into the collection, and in the collection I have my server IP address, which is really just my workstation address, and then 8080 hello world.json. I capture that response and I put that response into a global, and that global is called response_JSON. Once assigned to the response_JSON global, I then went to tests and I modified that. So here I'm getting it from globals response.json and then using that to look through and iterate through each of the values in there to see if there's a match with what was returned. The other two tests were able to stay the way that they were because it was hostname and status check. So this pre-request script is going to run each time that the test is going to run. Next, I'm going to run the collection. Click run. You can see it goes through and it passed. To show you that this is going to capture if the hello world returns something different, I'm going to make a modification this time to the Python implementation. In VS Code, I'm going to open up the Python implementation, main.py, and it has these squigglies because I'm actually in my Node dev container instead of a Python dev container that I have set up. But for this, I just need to make this small change. So again, I'm going to change out this random language for hello world. I'm going to go back to my terminal. In the terminal, I'm going to stop the containers from running because I need to rebuild the Python one. Those stopped. I'm going to rerun that. With that running, I'm going to go back to Postman and rerun the test. In Postman, run again. And now you can see that we have that one failure. Expand that. I'm going to go to view results. And now you can see that these two do not equal. Next, I'm going to switch over to run the Newman implementation of this and show you that it works the same way from the command line. Back in VS Code, I'm going to go back to the README to grab the Newman command. I'm going to paste that into my terminal and run the Newman command. And there we go, just as expected. Had that one failure in Python, and it says even inside of the Python folder, so Newman is really being pretty friendly here, saying where the failure was. I also want to call out that you can see that it's actually calling each time for each test. So we have 6 tests, so there are 6 calls to the hello world. And if I increase that number, so let's say if I run the test 5 times, then you can see that the assertion failed 5 times for Python, and the rest are all successful. But there we had 30 total calls and 30 calls to the test. So that's how I implemented Hello World in multiple languages. Now, docker-polyglot-world has multiple programming language implementations as well as multiple human languages of Hello World. As always, if you like this video or found it helpful, do give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future, and follow me on Twitter for any updates. I'll see you in the next one, and thanks for watching.